Good morning, everyone. Welcome to what is for us the Monday after Easter. I don't know what the timing is when you'll be watching this. For those of you who would like to relive Easter, we had a really glorious Easter here in the Yogananda Palo Alto community with lots of really beautiful music and chanting, and it was just marvelous. So I'm not sure if it's online yet, but it will be. And if you wish to relive it or revisit the spirit of Jesus, I think you'll find it very inspiring. Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday service, Good Friday, and then on Saturday we did a focused experience of the oratorio that Swami wrote. Really, it's just takes you to another world. Easter is Easter has all the power of Christmas and a lot less fuss. So it has a very different quality to it that's always profound from my experience. And today is Monday, and Monday is the day that I remind you of what we call the mission of the Masters, which is the name that I've given to the work that I do. And that work is made possible to a very large extent by the support of those of you who benefit from it. So if you would like to be part of that, you can go to the Patreon website where they have a wonderful system for supporting creative, innovative work in the world. Or you can help us directly by just donating on my own website, Asha Joy. We are in the process of making Mission of the Masters a tax-exempt entity. We're about halfway through that. And Patreon is not tax-exempt. But when we have the direct donation ability, we'll be sure and let you know. I also encourage you to become a subscriber on the YouTube channel. We're not there yet, but we're pushing up to 10,000 subscribers, which, considering the nature of the work we're doing, is a very, very gratifyingly nice number. We'll never be in the millions because I will never be in tune with this age, but we are in tune with where this age is heading, which is a much longer vision. And the more you can support that energy, the more we'll be doing our part to serve the mission of the Masters. Exactly. Our topic for Yogananda today is a little bit about that. Hope, new hope for all is what we're calling it. And Swami talks about how Master's mission was quantitative as well as qualitative, which is interesting. That he was here to bring enlightenment to a whole age, which is a very different kind of mission. So give us a moment to pray here, and then we'll get into our subject. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to all. Help us to remember that we are your children, that even though we may feel at times alone in this world, we are never alone. But we do forget. We do forget your ever loving presence with us. Awaken our hearts to a constant remembrance of your loving guidance, that we may live in this world with confidence, with joy, with courage, with clarity of purpose, as we move from delusion into the light of thy perfect love. Om. Peace. Amen. So we are working with this book, Biography of Yogananda by Swami Kriyananda, Chapter 17, Master's Salient Characteristics. And of 32 characteristics, we're now on number 12. As you will see in the next chapter, Swami discusses the issue at greater length there, but the essence of it is here. Master was concerned for the upliftment of all mankind. That was his mission on earth. quantitative, not only qualitative. Qualitative also, of course, for he brought techniques for transforming human consciousness through people's awareness and use of energy. Some of his disciples were concerned only for their own salvation. This was fine by Master, but he was grateful when he found anyone who wanted to bring his message to the whole world. New hope for all mankind was his motto. In the next chapter, Swami has just a few lines that are also interesting. My guru as an avatar had both a qualitative and a quantitative work to do. Seeing my own zeal for bringing everyone in the world to God, he had assigned me to this kind of activity also, in addition to my own meditations. Your duty in this life, he told me, will be one of intense activity and meditation. I could not help noting that he had put activity first, even before meditation. So, in the chapter which follows, which is too many pages to read, too many pages to read, he talks about Master going on his trip to India in 1935. Master came to America in 1920. In 1935, as Swami puts it, Master received a telepathic message from his guru, Sri Yukteswar, that said, return to India. It returned to India because Sri Yukteswar was going to leave his body. When Yogananda writes an autobiography of a yogi, he acts as if everything was a surprise. But in truth, he had divine insight into what was coming. Sri Yukteswar called him back to India because during that year that Yogananda was in India, Sri Yukteswar left his body. And so they were together when that happened, not at the moment of departure, but in that period. So Yogananda was able to put his guru's body into the ground to do the necessary rites and ceremonies that would be appropriate for that. He was able to commission his younger brother, who was an artist, to create a small temple, mandir, over the place where Yogananda's body was placed. Sri Yukteswar's body was placed. Those who have taken formal renunciation, their bodies are not cremated. Great saints' bodies should not be cremated, whether they were householders or renunciates. In the sannyas order, it's explained that when you take sannyas and you sit before the sannyas fire, you've already cremated your individuality. So there's no point in cremating the body also afterwards. So the bodies are buried. But the other reason a saint's body is not cremated is because, as Swami puts it, we treasure even the smallest thing that a master has used or touched. We have a museum at Ananda Village, the Shrine of the Masters, where we have a silver spoon that Yogananda used, a shawl that he wore, a pair of shoes, the instrument he played, just anything like that. Not all those items are at that shrine. But how much more his body? He used his body for his entire incarnation, and it's permeated with the vibrations of the Master. So Yogananda was not cremated, Sri Yukteswar was not cremated, Swami Kriyananda was not cremated. His body is under the floor, under the altar of the Moksha Mandir. The Moksha means liberation. The little temple that we have at Ananda Village where Kriyananda's body is, and it's magnificent. Yogananda's body is at Forest Lawn, and you can go and meditate in front of the crypt where his body is laying. And when Sri Yukteswar died, when Master was in India, Sri Yukteswar left his body sitting in the lotus posture. There's photographs of him, just his body after he was gone, with the disciples around him, but just the body. So they dug a hole in the sand, lined it with bricks, set his body there, sealed it up on the top, and then built a small mandir later on top of it. If you ever have the opportunity to go to India, to go to Puri, and it's called the Karar Ashram because that was Yukteswar's family name, to that little mandir. I say all of this because of all the holy places I've been, it's right up there on the top. It's one of my absolute favorite places in the world to meditate. So I've spent a long time talking about all of that. What made Yogananda a great avatar was his state of consciousness, of course, but every master has the same state of consciousness. So if you're in a state of absolute oneness with God, you cannot be more absolute oneness than somebody else. It's oneness, it takes away all possibility of hierarchy and measurement. And yet, sometimes we do speak of a great avatar, and as Swamiji put it, it's not because of their individual consciousness, which is the given, it's the assignment that they have received from the divine based on their own inclinations also. So this is an interesting aspect of the divine plan, which is that different jivas, different individuals have different inclinations, and that individuality is part of our vibration, seemingly, the masters tell us, seemingly forever. So Swami writes in the little summary here for this particular quality that many or most of Master's disciples were concerned with their own salvation. And where their primary concern was their own salvation. Now, that's not necessarily a selfish consideration because the more advanced we get spiritually, part of that advancement is that we embrace all of creation as our own, and our positive actions and our loving vibrations radiate outward and uplift the whole world. Master was talking when Rajasi Janakananda, Saint Lin, who was his most advanced male disciple, Master was walking with one of the disciples just outside at Encinitas Hermitage by the ocean, where he often stayed. And Rajasi was there, and he was meditating, and he was in a deep state of samadhi. And when they came close to him, Master said to the disciple he was walking with, "Be quiet. We mustn't disturb him." He said, "You have no idea what great blessings emanate when even one person goes as deeply into the spirit as Rajasi is going." So Rajasi helped Master's work by donating a lot of the money that he himself had earned. He served briefly as Master's successor, but he died very soon after Master did from a brain tumor. And Master, Rajasi didn't teach. Master had run a small meditation group. Master told him to close it. So it wasn't like for Rajasi, being a world figure, teaching and lecturing and putting his personality forward as Yogananda did was necessary for his salvation. They were simply two different jivas acting out two different stories. But Swami also writes that Swamiji himself had a temperament that was the same as Master's. Swamiji talks about even right after he read Autobiography of a Yogi and was traveling across the country, hadn't even met Yogananda, he had two thoughts in his mind. One was, I must become a disciple of this master because he can teach me about truth, and this is what I need to know to realize God. Simultaneously, Swami said, even as he was journeying across the country, everyone must know about this teaching. And Swamiji said when Master saw in him, and of course he'd been his disciple many times, so he wasn't surprised to see it, but he saw in Swami this absolute zeal to spread this message of self-realization to everyone. And Swami was interested in his own salvation, of course, but he was equally interested in working for the salvation of all. So Master guided him according to his own temperament, just as he had guided Rajasi according to his. But Master himself, as he wrote in God's Boatman, I think is the poem, where he says, I will return again and again, a trillion times if necessary, over crags of suffering with bleeding feet, as long as one stray brother is left behind. So Master's dedication to self-realization was for the sake of how he could give it to everyone. And this was the way in which he could give it to everyone. And in the subsequent chapter of this book, Swami talks about Master going to India, and they're meeting two of India's greatest saints who were contemporaries of Master. One was Ramana Maharshi, and the other was Anandamoy Ma. Master didn't write about Ramana Maharshi very much in autobiography, to a large extent because Paul Brunton published an entire book about Ramana Maharshi, or the book was largely about him, and it was redundant for Yogananda to publicize him also, but he did write about Anandamoy Ma. Now, the interesting point is Ramana Maharshi, he had an ashram, and he sat in his ashram, and he trained disciples, and many, many people came to him. But he had no mission. He didn't have a mission like Master had. He had his own self-realization. He freely shared it with everyone, but there was no commitment to creating a new reality for a new age, the way Master had. Anandamoy Ma also, who became very important in Swami Kriyananda's life. Anandamoy Ma lived until 1982. And when Swami was in India from 1958 to 1962, he became very close with Anandamoy Ma and spent a great deal of time with her in many places. And she never replaced in any respect Master in Swami's life, but she was his divine mother. And Anandamoy Ma, again, had no mission at all. And in fact, sort of laughed about it. Ashrams were founded in her name. A magazine was started in her name. Many things were done by her disciples, but she always called it your organization, your ashrams, your magazine. It was never hers. She allowed it to happen. But again, the particular temperament of her jiva was not inclined toward creating in this world, where Master came all the way from India to America. He started Self-Realization Fellowship. He started and wrote the Self-Realization magazine. He started many different enterprises. He tried to start a school and a community. He wanted to start a university. In our last session, I was talking about how Master created, innovations for the automobile, for the toilet, for medicine. Master's mind and inclination and, let's say, divine mission given to him by God was to look at every aspect of life and just let's see how we can move it closer towards self-realization, creating a meat substitute so that people could be nourished in a way that was satisfying both to their palate and to their bodies, but they could move toward vegetarianism. It's just he was thinking in every way. He wrote marriage vows in addition to the obvious brahmachari vows. He wrote marriage vows. He had a poem for funerals. It's like he was thinking about how to create a new social order. Swamiji made the comment that he said, the time will come when Master's teachings will essentially define all of society. He said, not necessarily Master's name. He will be known, but it won't be so much him personally as the message he brought that will gradually be adopted. And that kind of adaptation comes from the ground up. It's a grassroots movement as consciousness itself changes. And we, just being the recipients of this, little realize what a powerful influence Master, Yogananda, and all these other great masters have on actually bringing that revolution about. Master had this commitment to small intentional communities as being the social pattern of the future. And in the 60s and 70s, when I was sort of finding my way in this world, there was this huge movement all across the United States, mostly, and somewhat in other Western European countries, but primarily across the United States where Master was, this tremendous let's make communities. And only a handful of those that were started in the zeal of the moment. But where did that thought come from? And you sort of ask that question and you can sort of make up answers, but the real answer is Swami writes it in the last chapters of his autobiography, The Path, The New Path. He talks about how this world is really directed from above by these God realized souls. In autobiography, he says Jesus and Babaji together have planned the salvation of this age. Those of you who listen to me more than once will probably, the chances are, you're going to hear me quote that passage in autobiography because it's an important, among many important ideas, it's an important idea to realize where inspiration comes from, and that the world that we're living in, that we see with our senses, with the politics and the news media and the incredible arguments and everybody trying to get over everybody else, fortunately, and this is an enormous comfort, which is why I'm always repeating that, those people are just they're bit players in the great drama of life. They're important for a nanosecond, but they're not planning the salvation of this age. They're not really the source of the new directions. They just find a little piece of it and act out their often unspeakably arrogant little part, this little self-serving arrogant part. I mean, now that you have television and you can see all these politicians and hear their voices and watch them flip-flop according to their self-interest, it's just like, thank God they're not in charge. I feel really terrible for people who don't have this higher divine understanding, because to think that self-serving, well, I'll use the word fools, egoic fools like that, we're actually determining our destiny, would drive even a strong man to drink, as they say. But fortunately, it's not true, because souls like Paramahansa Yogananda, this line of gurus, other lines of gurus, other lineages of other rays from the same grand central sun of divine understanding, all these little rays are being pulled down. And what's so fascinating, this is what I was going to say a moment ago, because I've been in this long enough, I use organic foods as a very interesting example of this, of how consciousness itself, and I can say in some mysterious way, but it's not mysterious because the masters are radiating these thoughts, and all those who are in tune with them are picking them up. And as the yuga shifts on this planet, more and more elevated souls are being born to move this planet in a more upward direction. Simultaneously, a lot of demonic souls are being born right now. I have to say that because when a yuga is shifting, there's a lot of destruction that's possible. So souls who are waiting to have the opportunity to destroy things, because that's a karmic cycle people have to go through, and people who are waiting to have the opportunity to be evil and prejudiced, this is a good time to be born. Simultaneously, tremendous number of light force is being born. So on one hand, and I've chosen now to think of it like this, the light is just bursting out everywhere. And as the light bursts out, the shadow fights back. And there's a lot of shadow forces fighting back, but the light forces are going to win in the sense that this is an upward moving age, win in the sense of today and tomorrow, I'm not sure, but ultimate victory. Ultimate victory is always with the light, but even relatively short-term victory is with the light. And I was going to speak of organic foods in the 1960s, late 60s and 70s, when my first awakening consciousness was to become a health food fanatic. I became quite involved in all of that. A friend of ours was an accountant for the General Mills Company, which may or may not still exist. And they were the makers of all the cereals, Cheerios and cornflakes and all of those different cereals. And he was a very spiritual man. He was actually he was sort of the catalyzing mentor for my understanding self-realization. He was the center of this little coterie of consciousness explorers that I was part of before I met Swami. He wasn't he wasn't a saint or a master, but he was a charismatic, very fine charismatic man. Anyway, he told us as a fact that rather than eating the Cheerios themselves, you should throw away the Cheerios and you should tear the cardboard box into little pieces and put it in your bowl and put milk on it, because he said there was as much nutrition in the box as there was inside the box, because there was nothing, there was no life force there at all. And I became part of a movement that was in favor of life force in food, as the motto was. You wanted to get more energy from it than it took to digest it. If it took more energy to digest it than it gave you, it was not a good bargain. So we started looking for life force food. And everything had to be homemade at that point, everything, because you couldn't buy it. And organic foods, that whole thing, it was just all considered literally lunatic fringe. And then I went to Ananda, I lived my life, and all of a sudden Walmart's has got a huge big deal about organic health foods. It's like, where did that come from? It didn't come from the top down, it came from the bottom up. It came from this actual emanation of consciousness, which those who are in tune gradually pick up. Where does that start? Where does that thought form even begin? Now, really, it's fascinating to think about it. Then you read that Babaji and Jesus have planned the salvation of this age. And then you read in other places about how the masters just radiate these thought forms, and all those who are in tune begin to draw them in. And so Master was very much in favor of healthy, natural living. He was in favor of communities. He was in favor of meditation. He's obviously in favor of universal brother and sisterhood. He was in favor of the divine as a feminine expression and not merely as a patriarchal judge. And you see all of these. He was in favor of breaking down sectarian walls in spirituality. I was just reading about a very fundamentalist Christian who's known for his evangelical dedication, and he was raised in the whatever Southern Baptist, but now he goes to a non-denominational evangelical church. Now, even in that very narrow world, of Jesus Christ is the only Savior, even in that, the sectarian differences are breaking down. Even the evangelicals goes and looks for inspiration rather than for sectarian definition. And the sectarian definitions are fighting with each other. Even in that world, where did those ideas come from? This is what Swami writes in The New Path. Far more than people realize, this world is not run by politicians and prime ministers and media moguls or anything. They influence, but they're not in charge. It's run by the masters. It's run by the Himalayan gurus. It's run by those avatars and saints who, by their temperament, they're not only qualitatively, not only for the truly dedicated, but also for the mass upliftment of mankind. In Autobiography of a Yogi, we have this wonderful moment. Lahiri Mahashaya is mystically drawn to the Himalayas to meet again in that lifetime his great guru Babaji, and this extraordinary story and Autobiography of a Yogi is described, and how Lahiri gets Kriya Yoga, and then he thinks he's going to abandon his life in Varanasi, his wife and children, his job, who cares? He's just going to disappear into the Himalayas. Babaji says, no, it was no accident that you had your little householder scene. I think he sort of says it quite kind of like that. Your little scene was all set up. You have to go back to Varanasi. You have to continue to live in that way. And then you have to radiate the spiritual light. And you should initiate into Kriya all those who are willing to put aside all other considerations and devote themselves to God. And I'm going to paraphrase. Lahiri says, well, I guess I won't be initiating very many people because there aren't very many people who are capable of putting aside all such considerations only for God. And then Lahiri says, but there are many, many who could be helped by this wonderful God experiencing technique of Kriya. Then Babaji says, through you the divine has spoken. Give the Kriya and technique to all those who sincerely seek. And in that moment, when this is made into a movie, the bells will ring and the stars will shake, and countless of us, who are deeply sincere but not quite able to renounce everything, say thank you, thank you, thank you. Quantitative, not only qualitative. And that was his dramatic and poetic way of saying the times have changed and salvation now is for all. And aren't we grateful for that deeply, forever, eternally so? Bless you.